For many, Christmas is about tradition, connecting with family, observing faith, the joy of gifting. For others, Christmas equals terror, the howl of a hurricane, the rumble of an earthquake, the sickening sound of impact as an airplane fails. Welcome to Worst Christmas Ever. 4 stories of cataclysmic disasters that really ruin Christmas. One of the great joys of Christmas is getting together with family. To do so, many take to the air. Flying is fast and safe, most of the time.
Our family was trying to get together for Christmas. My oldest brother and his wife lived in Washington, D.C., and my parents had already gone down to visit them because they had a new baby.
It's Christmas Eve, 1968. Susan Wyand boards Allegheny Air Flight 736 in Erie, Pennsylvania. There are 3 stops scheduled on this Yuletide flight: Bradford, Harrisburg, and Washington, D.C. And now, a closer look at Bradford. In 1968, Bradford, Pennsylvania is a prosperous city, picturesque rolling hills and valleys.
Most of the area around here is woods. We're part of the Allegheny National Forest. There's a lot of private wooded areas around here.
In 1968, Bradford is producing oil in abundance. There are plenty of good jobs, and the lifestyle is laid back.
Well, for me, Bradford in the 60s was a booming town. It was very exciting. We had a lot of industry here.
On this December 24th, Bradford is the site of an avoidable aviation disaster that will soon ruin Christmas. Bradford is a regular stop for Allegheny Airlines. This regional short-hop carrier uses the reliable Corvair 580 twin-prop plane to serve its customers.
It was a very nice airplane. High-powered, had a good power-to-weight ratio. Our pilots really liked it.
Boarding the aircraft is eye specialist Fred Dankmeyer, rushing to his mother's side after her heart attack. Tonight's flight is running an hour late, but passenger Susan Wyand doesn't mind. She's happy to catch this late flight after work. Flight attendant Rita Boylan makes adjustments in the cabin.
One couple traveling with their 2 teenage children were separated. She and her daughter were asked to move to a different part of the plane for balance.
Kathy Angel and her mother moved to seats near the front of the plane, while her father and brother remained further back in the cabin. Outside, snow falls.
I remember looking out the window before takeoff as we were taxiing down the runway, and the snow was so intense that it was hard to see the light at the end of the wing.
Pilots Gary Lee and Rick Gardner lift off at 7:46 p.m. for the short jump from Erie to Bradford. There are 47 on board. Meantime, volunteer fireman Roy Compton and his family share Christmas dinner with his parents, who live near the airport. Roy clocks the weather.
While we were there, it was snowing real hard and things, and I told my wife we should go home because the roads are getting bad.
To overcome bad visibility, the Bradford Airport uses a radio beacon to guide aircraft to its runway. Flight 736 picks up the signal.
You fly over the radio beacon. When you're over that beacon, you do what is called a procedure turn. You fly outbound away from the airport, do a turn so that you turn inbound, and you pass a second time then over the beacon, headed directly for the airport.
With the beacon lined up, Captain Lee and First Officer Gardner report their inbound position to flight controllers at the Bradford Flight Service Station. and they follow the approach plate descent instructions as they steer for the tarmac.
That approach plate will give directions. It'll give headings that you're to fly, and it'll also give altitudes. And it will give an MDA, a minimum descent altitude, which you're not supposed to go below.
The tower shares weather information: winds 24 to 40, light blowing snow, 1/2 to 1.5 miles visibility. On the ground, Roy Compton hears Flight 736 pass overhead.
My mother, she knows these airplanes. They go out and they make a turn and then they come back. We actually heard it when it come back. And she said, that plane sounds awful funny to me.
The flight went on as normal until we were approaching Bradford. And the announcement was made to buckle your seatbelts. We were on final approach, and that the plane would be landing shortly.
For reasons unknown, Pilot Lee and co-pilot Gardner are flying far below the minimum descent altitude. They activate their landing lights. At 8:11, Lee radios he can't spot the runway.
There was turbulence, and all of a sudden, there was a loud ripping sound.
The pilots try to pull up, but it's too late.
I looked out, and I could see the wing was gone. And then there was like electricity or sparks flying through the cabin.
Flight 736 clips the treetops. One wing, then the other, are ripped from the plane. The skin of the plane splits from cockpit to tail. The fuselage slices an 800-foot gash through the forest. Finally plowing into snow-covered, swampy ground, the plane comes to rest, upside down. Bradford air controllers expect to see Flight 736 touching down. A minute goes by, another. They try radioing the missing plane. Nothing. Tension builds. Search and rescue is launched. Inside the destroyed aircraft, stunned survivors stir, battered and broken.
I remember regaining consciousness. I was having problems breathing, and I tried to lift a hand to clear something away from my nose. And I tried to scream, and all that would come out was like a moan.
Some passengers stumble outside. All are injured. It's freezing. Someone starts a fire.
They used whatever they could find, pillows, luggage, to build this fire because it was very, very cold.
Roy Compton's looking for the crash site. With a local doctor and several other rescuers, he's on the first vehicle heading into the woods, hoping to find any sign of the missing plane.
It was snowing, it was very, very cold. We were actually plowing snow with the fire truck.
The emergency responders spot something.
And was driving up an old railroad grade down there and happened to spot a little twinkle of light down in like a swampy area.
As they get closer, they can't believe their eyes.
There was like probably 8 or 10 people around a big bonfire in the middle of a swamp down there.
The rescuers approach on foot. The scene that awaits them is horrific. They search for survivors.
We just knew it was a plane wreck, so we just went to help.
First person I came to was a lady that was upside down in her seat, hollering, screaming, "Get my baby, get my baby." The baby was laying on her lap, so she actually protected it. Dr. Sicker showed up, stuck his finger in the baby's mouth, the baby bit him, so he said the baby was all right.
The earth was shoved up inside the plane. I crawled up in the space where I could get up in, and I grabbed onto a person's leg, and it was loose.
We walked around to the front of the plane. There was a stewardess hanging out the front of the plane, and they told her, said, "Just relax, we'll have you out of there in a minute." And she said, "Don't worry about me, get the other people."
There was a lady lying upside down, strapped in her seat, completely flipped over, her head was buried in the dirt. I literally dug the snow and stuff out away from her face with my bare hands so she could breathe.
And I could hear people screaming in there. So I crawled in and I found him. It was Dr. Dackmeyer. He had a piece of metal sticking out of his eye. And he's probably a third of the way covered in dirt.
The doctor is trapped by a dead seatmate.
had to break this guy's legs that were wrapped around Dr. Dackmeyer in order to get Dr. Dackmeyer out. We got him out. They hauled him away.
Susan Wyatt, seriously injured, is also pinned.
The gentleman came back and tried to pull me out by reaching under my arms and tugging. He was unable to move me and realized that the seatbelt was still fastened. And he reached down and unfastened the seatbelt, and they pulled me out by my shoulders.
The boggy, bumpy ground slows the evacuation of survivors and injured. More help arrives.
The only way we get to them was snowmobiles with little sleds on the back. We're hauling people out to the highway so we could get them out to the ambulances and stuff.
Susan swims in and out of consciousness.
The next thing I remember was becoming conscious, I guess, around a fire. I remember hearing one of the rescue workers say, "I think we ought to take the kids first." And I thought, I hope they think I'm a kid. I was tied to a toboggan, which was hitched to a snowmobile, and taken out of the area to an ambulance that was waiting.
Rescuer Jim Reimer carefully removes the broken body of a young passenger.
It was Kathy Angel. She was 14 years old, took her out. I remember the doctor said, "No, put her on that cutter and take it nice and easy. She's got a broken neck."
But his efforts are in vain.
Well, she never made it. She died up in the Hammond Hospital.
Those at the front of the plane bear the brunt of the impact. Dead are Captain Gary Lee and First Officer Richard Gardner. Kathy's mother is found dead, killed on impact. Kathy's father and brother, seated in the rear of the plane, survive. So does flight attendant Rita Boylan. Susan Wyatt clings to life.
I have no recollection of arriving at the hospital. The doctor who treated me said that I was not breathing, but I did have faint heart sounds, and they resuscitated me.
Susan has internal injuries, fractured teeth, a broken hand, 10 broken ribs, and 4 broken vertebrae. Her recovery is long and painful, but Susan recovers and thrives. When dawn breaks on Christmas morning 1968, the toll can be counted. 20 people have perished in the Pennsylvania woods, and 27 have survived. But the terror isn't over.
It was unbelievable that a second one in that short a time happened.
The exact same chain of events occurs just 13 days later, on January 6, 1969, when pilots using the same radio beacon landing system also smash into the ground. 11 more perish, 25 survive.
But I think both accidents were caused by the same effect.
Spurred by the loss, Bradford installs an ILS, an instrument landing system.
The ILS system consists of a radio beam going up at about a 3-degree angle. It's very narrow, both up and down and left and right.
A much narrower beam guides aircraft from their approach to the front of the runway.
I think if they had had the instrument landing system at the time of these accidents would never have happened.
For those that lost loved ones in the twin crashes, Christmas shall forever be a time of sorrow.
There were 20 people on that plane that didn't make it.
Saw the pilot, co-pilot, both deceased. A couple stewardesses deceased. I saw several of the passengers deceased.
To this day, I can remember that baby crying and those gentlemen going at that plane, trying to get into that plane.
My thoughts are mostly with those who didn't make it and how that must have torn their families apart that Christmas and every Christmas to follow.
It's Christmas Eve 1953. The packed Wellington to Auckland passenger train nears the midway point of its 400-mile run across New Zealand's North Island. The train is crowded, the mood festive. But for half the nearly 300 people aboard, this Christmas is their last. But first, facts about Mount Rapayu. Mount Rapayu is the highest point on New Zealand's North Island.
It's cold, rugged landscape, full of rocks, boulders, ash from past eruptions.
It's one of the most active volcanoes in New Zealand.
Inside Ruapayu's volcanic crater, a lake grows.
And the water comes from melting snow and ice, and it basically reaches a level and overflows over the lowest part of the crater rim and forms the head of the Wangahoo River.
Holding back the water inside Crater Lake is a layer of thick ash, reinforced by the Wangahoo Glacier. When this unstable retaining wall ruptures, a mighty torrent of water, boulders, and debris is unleashed. It's called a lahar.
Lahar is an Indonesian word for volcanic mudflow, basically a flood, a little bit like a concrete slurry, very sediment-laden water.
And a lahar moves with heart-stopping speed. On board the Wellington to Auckland Express, passengers greet the coming night. Beverly Mayhe and her brother John are seated in passenger car 2.
We did have first-class tickets, but we could not have a seat because they were totally booked. So we were put in the second carriage from the engine.
As engineer Charles Parker pilots the train from one station to the next, young lovers Ann Pollison and Thomas Moyer meet up on board.
We had a happy time together on the train. I was working that day and catching the train just after 6, I think it came through Palmerston, and Thomas had got on the train in Liven.
Sisters Anne and Helen Kennedy are off to celebrate Christmas with family near Owakuni. After a stop in Huntersville, train guard William Inglis reseats John and Beverly Mayhe.
Consequently, he came through in Hunterville and said, well, there's a couple of first-class seats up in the back carriage. So we were changed at Hunterville from second-class to first-class seats.
It will be a life-altering change. Unusual seismic activity is detected on the slopes of Mount Rapayu. A seismograph at Chateau Tongariro reports a disturbance.
It was one of those graph wheels. It just showed a wheel that popped up. At 8 o'clock, vibrations were picked up on the seismograph.
The machine signals a catastrophe. Crater Lake has exploded out of its confinement, unleashing a massive lahar. 70,000 tons of water, mud, and debris overwhelm the Wangahoo River. A road bridge over the river is tossed aside. The piers of the sturdier railway bridge suffer impact after impact.
Those solid bridge piers, which weighed over 126 tons, were carried hundreds of yards down the river.
Engineer Charles Parker pulls Express 626 out of Waiouru Station toward the critically weakened rail bridge. Driving to Owakuni on the nearby road, a local man, Cyril Ellis, skids to a stop.
Got out to investigate. Just as he did that, he saw a big bright light about a mile down the railway line.
The speeding train approaches. Flashlight in hand, Cyril Ellis sprints for the tracks, frantically waving.
The driver, Mr. Parker, very experienced engine driver, did see the torch. The emergency brakes were applied.
The screech of emergency brakes cuts through the night air. The locked wheels struggle to slow tons of speeding steel. But it's too little, and it's too late.
The express went roaring across the railway bridge just north of Tangiwai and plunged into the Wangahoo River.
As the bridge collapses, the engine, tender, and first 5 passenger cars take flight.
The carriage is actually right up over top of the locomotive. The train did a jump 40 yards across the other side of the bank.
As train hits water, the tremendous power of the lahar pins the first car against the near bank. The next 4 cars are pushed downstream like toys. Ann Pollison, in passenger car 3, is stunned by the impact.
Next thing I knew, there was this roaring, rushing sound, and I actually came to under the water, and this other girl had grabbed me by the hair, and she'd pulled me up, and I was looking for Thomas.
The women climb through a broken window onto the top of the car. They will be the only survivors of the packed passenger car.
Whether I would have survived if this girl hadn't pulled me up is just one of those things you don't know.
176 passengers are flushed into the raging waters. Engineer Charles Parker and fireman Lance Redmond disappear into the depths. The sixth passenger car teeters uncertainly on the very edge of the broken bridge. Cyril Ellis climbs aboard, meeting shocked train guard William Inglis.
When running down through that first-class carriage and they peered out into the roaring torrent, he said, "By oh God, I've lost an engine and 5 carriages in the river."
Short seconds later, the dangling sixth car rips free of the train, dropping into the boiling river. Ellis, Inglis, and the passengers experience a rush of terror as the carriage floods around them.
Have your torches, and they got the people down the carriages, down into the carriage, broke some windows, and actually pulled the people clear out of the carriage.
The passengers huddle atop the carriage, just above the surging waters. The action taken to save lives is heroic, but one passenger doesn't survive. Helen Kennedy's sister Anne remains trapped.
The girl that was drowned in that carriage, from all accounts, was crushed by the weight of the luggage that fell onto her down the far end of the carriage, and she was under the water for too long.
Of the 176 passengers in the river, only 28 survived the plunge. Above the river, the rest of the train is evacuated.
So, of course, we all got out, and once you got out of the carriage, you could hear the noise of the river and the screams of the people.
Among those dying is Thomas Moore, Ann Pollison's boyfriend.
They never actually found Thomas. Search went on for days. His mother's only child, but he was never ever found. Just a special person, of course, to me.
Finally spent, the Lahar slowly subsides. Passengers huddling atop car 6 wade to safety. News of the accident spreads to local communities.
When the express didn't arrive and the word came through that what had happened, they immediately drove out there.
It was breaking day, so we hopped in our truck and we went upstream.
It was a great community effort to save any survivors.
But there are few to save, as local farmer Dave Barry finds.
This horrific scene just opened up before us, and it was just unbelievable. You could make out the forms of what was left of carriages. There wasn't a great lot you could do really at that stage, because any body that was going to be rescued from the immediate area had already been rescued, and that was only very, very few.
First thing, of course, I saw was a body lying on the sand. There was quite a few on the other side of the river, and any bodies that were on this side, they would throw me a rope over, and I would tie the body to the rope, and then they would have to pull the body back through the river.
The gruesome act of recovering the dead found along the banks of the Whangaehu River repeats over and over.
They even put nets out across the mouth along the river, out by the sea, to catch bodies floating down. And they're all taken to New Zealand Army camp at Wairau.
The Kennedy boys search for their sisters.
Well, and Jim hitched a ride to Wairau Army camp, and that's when he found that Helen was safe and Anne was dead.
The Whangaehu River doesn't give up all its victims. The bodies of 20 passengers are never found. In the early months of 1954, the wreckage of Express 626 is removed, and a new, stronger rail bridge is built. And a more reliable early warning system to detect lahars is installed. But nothing erases the memory of 151 innocent lives lost that terrible Christmas Eve.
It gives you a far wider view of what life may or may not be. You know, none of us know when we're going to go. It's just the flick of a providence.
I think the saddest part that stood out in my mind was the amount of children's toys and things like that were washed up on little backwashers and things like that. I presume people were taking presents home for Christmas.
It's 1974, and the residents of Darwin, Australia prepare for the Yuletide. In these latitudes, Christmas is a summer holiday. And now, a bit about Darwin and its weather. Darwin is an isolated community perched on the northern coast of Australia. The beachside government town is home to 50,000 residents.
Almost nobody had grown up and lived there all their life. Everyone came from somewhere or other.
But Darwin at Christmas has a deadly downside. The heat and humidity at these latitudes spawn major storms. Around here, cyclones are common.
Tropical cyclone is a concentration of energy in a small space, and it's a tropical revolving storm. In the Americas, they're hurricanes. In Asia, they're typhoons.
Darwinians are accustomed to powerful weather.
Lots of lightning, thunder, wind, rain, heavy, heavy rain. Like sometimes you can be driving a car along the road and the rain's so heavy you have to stop.
So there's cyclone warning, cyclone alerts, usually just be on the lookout. There's a cyclone hanging around or forming.
If there's a typical Darwin resident, she might be Julie Tamo. Julie's moved to Darwin with husband Heike and sons Rowan and Brendan. They live an enviable life.
We had a huge circle of friends that were all just young marrieds. We used to do things like go and play squash during the day with, take the kids and go water skiing.
And like most Darwinians, Julie and Heike are not concerned about a slow-moving cyclone that is tracking to the north off the Arafura Sea.
We'd been putting out warnings telling people it was there, but that it wasn't a threat to Darwin.
Normally, cyclones pass by the city. A nuisance, but that's all.
And because so many cyclones came close and didn't actually strike with the full force, you got lulled into a false sense of security, really.
Halima Douth is a suburban homemaker in Darwin, raising daughters Simone and Lisa with husband David. She enjoys a visit with her neighbor, Mrs. Butler. As her kids play with the older woman's well-loved dog, Halima clocks the weather.
So I got up, had a look at our back doors, which the sea was behind that, so, the wind was quite strong coming from there.
Living close by are Edwin, Elva, and Jane Milliken. Their conversation turns to the storm outside.
We'd talked about the fact that it was 33 years since the last cyclone had hit Darwin, and we reckoned we were about due for another.
Unlike most of their neighbors, the Millikens take the storm warnings seriously.
We'd laid in extra water supplies, we'd bought some gas, a gas cooker, and things of this sort.
Christmas preparations take an unexpected turn for Julie Tamo as her son Rowan takes ill. She drives him to the hospital. The boy's kept overnight.
Which was really upsetting because it's Christmas Eve and he was pretty upset about it.
As she drives home, Julie sees that today's storm is different, that the ocean is different.
It was really overcast and almost getting dark. It looked unusual, like I hadn't really seen before, like it was boiling.
With the rain and wind increasing, the Milliken family hunkers down in the deepest part of their house.
The drizzle increased, but nobody took any notice of except that you knew it was the edge of the cyclone.
Halima Douth, too, hears the storm coming.
By then the storm was really blowing and whipping up and bashing against the sort of coming right in the back patio.
She looks for weather updates.
And then I went back to the TV. There were snow warnings on TV, so I thought, can't be too bad.
But the weather's quickly becoming too bad at the Bureau of Meteorology.
We had to make a very quick decision to change the whole warning strategy and say it's not going past, it's now coming back towards Darwin.
Dire warnings are issued.
I heard a car going along Lakeside Drive and they had one of those loudspeakers and they said, "The cyclone is imminent, everybody stay indoors. Don't leave your home, stay indoors."
Halima wakes Heike.
It wasn't too long when it just got so bad. The wind was really, really strong.
The couple grab their daughters from their beds.
And I said to David, we've got to get the dining room table and we've got to put it in between the kitchen cupboards. So we all got under the table.
The cyclone arrives at full force around midnight. Wind-driven rain slams the Douth house at over 130 miles per hour. There is a deafening sound as the roof is torn off.
And you actually heard it peeling off just like paper, and that was the most horrific noise.
Under that dining table, Halima holds on for dear life.
I had one girl on this leg and one girl on this leg. I thought, I'm not letting them go for anything. If we go, we all go together.
The cyclone, christened Tracy, slams into Julie Tamo's house.
Water started pouring through the closed louvers like they weren't even closed, and the house started flooding.
Julie's motherly intuition springs to life.
I just had this horrible feeling and I ran down to the bedroom and grabbed our 2-year-old son. I just got him out of his bed by seconds before he would have been completely blown away. And as I was running back up the passage holding him, the whole roof just peeled off. Our bedroom blew away, his bedroom blew away.
The house breaks up around them. Julie is hit by flying debris. Heike pushes his family into the bathroom, tries closing the door.
And something came straight through the door and hit him in the back of the head.
Heike goes down.
I was able to pull him into the toilet and get him curled around the base of the toilet. And so I've got Brendan in front of me and my legs either side. And then Heike came to, and he's just saying, "Oh, my head," you know, and he put his hand up. He could put his fingers all in the back of his head. It was just all split open at the back.
Julie holds little Brendan close.
His little body was just like that, shaking and shaking, you know, never made a sound.
What's left of the house offers little shelter.
And then the wall between the toilet and the kitchen just disappeared. And the fridge that was backing onto that wall, it just took off, like it just flew through the air.
Julie clings to the bathroom plumbing for dear life.
When I saw the fridge blowing through the air, I thought, that's it, we're going to die. So the kitchen blew away, the cupboards, the sink.
The wind's incredible velocity turns wood, iron, and sheet metal into lethal weapons. The city's power is cut. In Darwin city center, resident Bob Smith awakens with a start.
And I actually woke up with the cyclone howling and the power was off.
Bob takes cover.
Yeah, I went and sat behind the refrigerator, which gave protection from one side and the wall of the kitchen from the other. And one quite substantial piece of wood came through and, just missed me.
The Millikens, Edwin, Elva, and Jane, hear their house being pounded by objects large and small.
What we thought was a wall going must have been the final sheet of the roof, thumping, and finally it went and was blown off.
Then, the wind and noise stop.
From the sudden screaming fury, it was suddenly still and silent.
An eerie calm descends as the eye of the storm passes.
And then the fury broke again.
Cyclone Tracy continues her killing rampage for 3 more hours. Finally, her epicenter tracks into the southern desert. Her energy is spent.
I haven't felt so close to weeping when I saw the devastation of the houses.
The people of Darwin cautiously emerge from their hiding places this terrible Christmas morning. The scene before them is shocking. Their city lies in ruin.
You know, it just looked like a bomb blast. Just like what pictures you see of Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
After their terror-filled night, Julie, Heike, and Brandon Tamo stumble out of what's left of their bathroom. Though their house is destroyed, Julie's thoughts are elsewhere.
But all this time, of course, I was thinking about Rowan in the hospital.
Their car is crushed, so a neighbor drives the shell-shocked family across what looks like a war zone.
There was just rubbish all over the streets, but you just went over the rubbish, flat tyres, the lot.
After a harrowing ride, they find Rowan safe. He and the hospital survive the storm. The Douth family has also survived, coming out from under their dining table after a long, frightening night. Their home is heavily damaged, but they have survived, unlike family friend Mrs. Butler.
Apparently her dog ran out of the house and she went out after the dog, and they found her with she was decapitated.
There was a lot of corrugated iron, and you could imagine corrugated sheeting iron is like, flying saw blades.
Edwin, Edna, and Jane Milliken are thankful for what's left of their home this Christmas morning.
When we got up there, the glass louvers were gone, but the structure of the house was still there.
Bob Smith ventures out after a long night behind his fridge. His older apartment building is largely untouched, but his friends George and Madeleine don't fare so well.
I think they tried to get down into their car, but they didn't make it.
Smith claims that Madeleine survived her serious injuries, but that George did not. The Australian Armed Forces arrived to find the city without power, drinking water, or even adequate shelter for its traumatized residents. An evacuation of 25,000 begins.
I think if too many people had to stay there for too long, things like dysentery and other diseases could have been prevalent.
Darwinians reflect on their shattered world.
Once one house starts to collapse, the debris from that hits another, and it's like a pack of cards. These houses were not properly built, they were not properly braced.
The late warning of an incoming cyclone is also questioned. The failings are blamed on technology or the lack thereof.
We had a radar which can't see cyclones until they get to within a couple of 100 kilometres. In fact, the way to see what was happening on a radar was very primitive.
All weather warning systems get upgraded after the storm. Australians are a resilient people. They draw on their strength to rebuild their city.
There was a lot of comradeship developed between people, how it does in adversity, and brought people together.
But with death and destruction at every turn, the emotional toll of the disaster is massive.
There was a lot of tragedy, and it was very traumatic afterwards. I know myself that I probably went through 3 months of some sort of nervous breakdown.
Property damage from the cyclone is estimated at nearly $1 billion. Hundreds of walking wounded recover, and remembrances for the 65 victims of Cyclone Tracy begin. The memory of a city destroyed is refreshed each and every Christmas.
It was just unbelievable. I'll never ever take a cyclone lightly again.
December 22nd, 1972, just 3 days before Christmas in sunny Central America. For Nicaraguans, Christmas is an especially important time. Time to remember others. Time to contemplate spiritual rebirth. Few in the city of Managua are thinking of disaster, but Mother Nature follows no calendar. And now, a bit about geography. There are more than 40 active volcanoes along the coast, from Guatemala to Costa Rica. Across Central America, eruptions and tremors are common.
The surface is covered by huge plates. We call it tectonic plates. They may have a diameter of several thousand kilometers. We here in Central America, we are on the Caribbean plate, and another plate, which is coming from the Pacific Ocean, is moving against us and shocking our plate.
In 1972, Managua is home to 400,000 residents and is the seat of the country's government. Managua is also the transportation and trade center of Nicaragua. Among its residents are the very rich and the very poor. Most in Managua aren't thinking about earthquakes. They're thinking about Christmas.
People were shopping. People were in the stores, in the main streets. There was a festive mood, and people were looking forward to Christmas.
Managua was nice because it was small. One could walk to go to downtown Managua. I would stroll with my mom and dad to see the stores.
The people here work hard.
They always have been very friendly and very enterprising, hardworking. Thus, Managua was a very lively city.
9-year-old Gustavo Cruz is decorating his local church.
We were working that night, putting up the Christmas tree, putting up lights, putting up festoons, garlands, putting up angels we made with cardboard and paper.
Outside the city center, university student Lehia Sandoval studies.
My family was a very big family where the grandmother was the center, and all her children, and there were approximately 12 people, maybe 13. We were all there.
Genoveva Bologna's sons have just come home for the holidays.
They arrived that night because they were on vacation to spend Christmas. So they came from Leon here to Managua. So they got together and they chit-chatted, conversed, talked, and they told their jokes and sang with the guitar.
2 tremors, one at 9:30 and another 45 minutes later, dampened the evening's festivities.
When there was the initial small tremor, my mom said, "Well, should we leave or not? For whatever mess may occur, we better get home."
The shaking disrupts a gathering 18-year-old Ray Ramirez is attending.
There was a very strong tremor. When I say very strong, I mean it was above the strength of normal tremors. So much so was the strength of the tremor that the party was canceled. Even though the tremor was strong, very few people made the decision to take precautions, that something more could happen.
That something more strikes 2 hours later at 12:27 a.m. on December 23, 1972. It's a magnitude 6.2 earthquake. Its epicenter only 20 miles from city center. Almost instantly, 5 square miles of the city core turned to rubble.
It was like I was dumbfounded because it was like everything fell on me.
The quake vibrates up and down, not side to side. Genoveva Bologna's bedroom shakes violently.
It was all a haze, like I had lost my memory at that moment. I couldn't remember anything.
Her daughters lie next door.
My sister and I slept in the same bed. There was a lot of dust that had fallen from the adobe house, and they say we were practically covered in dust. When my brothers banged on the door to break it down, there were other earthquakes.
After a strong earthquake, there occur always a lot of aftershocks. So houses which were not destroyed by the main shocks, later were destroyed by the aftershocks.
Aftershock debris buries her daughters. Genoveva's sons frantically dig into the pile of rubble.
They could feel only the dirt. And then they said, "We feel someone's head and someone else's arm." Maybe 5 minutes later, they called to me and said, "Mita, we're right here. We have the girls."
So then there was a lot of fear and a lot of dust.
When the earth starts heaving, Lehia Sandoval doesn't hesitate. She yanks her younger sister out of bed.
If I hadn't managed to get her out, I think she definitely would have died. The wall fell where we were, and there were a lot of big cinder blocks on top of my sister's bed. It was buried. The walls fell during the second quake, and we were able to get my aunt out.
9-year-old Gustavo Leighton Cruz tries to be brave as the earth shakes.
When the earthquake began, I wasn't scared. It wasn't until a tile fell on my rib that I began to cry and began to call my mom and dad. And then my dad came and grabbed me and grabbed my sister. He was taking the 2 of us, and my mom was taking the 2 smaller ones. After, he brought out some mats and we lay in the street. And you could see below, downtown Managua looked all scarlet, and you could hear explosions.
Managua is plunged into darkness as electricity fails, then water. The scene turns apocalyptic.
Everything was dark, and the sky was red because of the fires. And the people screamed, cried. They kneeled and asked God that it all be over because the older ladies, the mothers, were saying that it was the end of the world.
Death is not far behind.
On the block where I lived, 13 children died. Not because the houses fell or because they were stuck or that. Instead, so much dust was lifted from the walls and from everywhere that the children suffocated.
In my family, there was an uncle of mine who was a doctor, and I saw a mother go by with her son, who was about 8 years old, over her shoulders, carrying him and crying. So she came to our house to look for my uncle, to help her because her boy was hurt. That was when my uncle said that the boy was dead.
The dead lie in the streets, buildings crumbling around them. 53,000 homes collapse. All 4 of the city's hospitals are destroyed.
It was havoc. I still could see that relatives were carrying their dead folks in doors that were used as litters. And the impression I got was that these people had been thrown into a giant powder box. There was nothing that we could do. Most of them were dead already.
8 out of 10 small businesses vanish. Government buildings, schools, and banks gone.
We did not have any electricity, no potable water, and it was a very devastating situation.
The morning light reveals more extensive damage.
I had a motorcycle, so the next morning, I went to take a spin through all of Managua to see everything that had happened. One of the things that most impacted me was when I got to the central part of Managua. A lot of places were on fire there. There was no one putting them out. There was no one.
None escape this deadly disaster.
Everyone was hurting, and we said it was a black Christmas for us. Everybody was hurting because they lost everything they had.
Following the earthquake, looting is rampant. Evacuation of the city begins Christmas Day. Residents leave the city as aftershocks continue.
It was not the rainy season when the earthquake took place. Then people could sleep out in the open, and this helped in that respect. A great majority of the people went to relatives' homes.
International aid pours into the country, but reports surface of officials illegally seizing aid shipments. Determined to get help to the people, baseball star Roberto Clemente, the 1971 World Series most valuable player, charters an airplane.
He brought this plane from Puerto Rico to help, and unfortunately it crashed, and he perished in the Caribbean.
The rebuilding of Managua is a slow process, hindered by the political upheavals of 1970s Nicaragua. But the people prevail.
The spirit of the Nicaraguan people was not broken down. It was affected because we all grieved and we mourned, but there was a determination to work together.
Those massive tectonic plates will always shake things up across Central America, even at Christmas.
There will be another earthquake in Managua, but we don't know when. Managua is still at risk, and always it will be at risk.
For Roy Compton, Christmas will be forever scarred by the memory of the dead and dying inside Allegheny Airlines Flight 736. For Helen Kennedy, Christmas is a painful reminder of how Sister Ann perished on the Wellington to Auckland Express. For Halima Douth, Christmas time is when a friend's head and body were separated by Cyclone Tracy. And for Ray Ramirez, Christmas recalls the sight of 13 dust-covered children suffocated by the Managua earthquake. So this Christmas, enjoy the good times, celebrate friendship, and savor the spirit of the season. Merry Christmas to you and yours.